Right, bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
What are they?
They are everyone, and they are no one. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors. They are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
Someone? What are you trying to tell me? That I can dodge bullets?
No. I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to. The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?
I was...
Look again. Freeze it.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Revolution Radio. You are listening to Private Eye Matrix Revealed on freedomslips.com. I'm your host, Private Investigator, as always. And with me is my producer, Joe Kiernan, and hopefully Don Morshid is with me as well. He is my assistant. Joe, is Don with us, too?
He will be with us shortly. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How's the weather in where you are?
It's been a little wet, a little bit of rain, but it all broke through today, and I got to see a good sunset, and we're looking to a good week.
Really? That's great, because it's like 100 degrees here.
Oh, no. Actually, it's a little bit cooler than it should be this time of year, but it was a beautiful day. It's gorgeous weather here. I'm complaining, and it was like 80 degrees.
Oh, come on, Joe. I mean, you live on the beach. I mean,
No.
You can't miss that. That's wonderful.
I'm getting grumpy as I get older.
Okay, Joe, I have to say, I have seen you on television, and you don't look that old at all.
Thank you very much.
All right, so Revolution Radio, again, is 100% listener-supported, so please go to our website, freedomslips.com, make your donations there. That's what keeps us on the air. If you'd like to call us tonight, I would really appreciate if you call us first at 347-688-2902, or just call my producer, Joe Kiernan, directly at 843-491-6077. And
Monique, we have a new promo for your show tonight.
Oh, well, tell me about
Hawk
it.
arranged a new promo for the show.
All right.
I don't know if we have, whenever you're ready, Hawk, we are ready to roll. We don't have him live on air with us yet, but he's more than welcome to hop in.
Okay.
Who are you? I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
Why am I here?
You are the eventuality of an anomaly which, despite my sincerest efforts, I have been unable to eliminate from what is otherwise a harmony of mathematical precision, which has led you inexorably here.
You haven't answered my question.
The Matrix is older than you know. As you are undoubtedly gathering, the anomaly is systemic, creating fluctuations in even the most simplistic equation.
Choice. The problem is choice.
Right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Be here Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Private Eye Matrix Revealed with Monique Lasan.
All right. What happened to the woman in red? No, that's all right. I don't always wear red. I'm very thankful. Thank you, Nighthawk.
That was excellent.
That was really, really good.
And I do believe Our good friend Don has joined us.
Excellent, because I do need him. Tonight, we'll be speaking to John Cameron, who's the author of the book, It's Me, the Serial Killer You Never Heard Of. But before I introduce John, I'm going to ask Don Morshed to give you a little profile of a serial killer and some statistics. I don't know if anyone knows that, but I've studied for my master's forensic science. I specialize in serial killers for many years. That's all I wrote about. So this is a very interesting subject to me, but I really like for Don to kind of explain that to you guys. So Don, would you tell us what you've got? And welcome to the show. Is Don with us? Don, speak. Unmute.
Don might have stage fright today.
Are you talking to John or Don?
Don Morshed. Don Morshed. He's somewhere in there. Okay. Well, I don't have the statistics in front of me. I don't know what's going on with Don, but I will tell you right off the bat pretty much what I know about serial killers. They live among us for many, many years without being detected. And they usually are white male between 24 and I would say 35 years old. They get married, they have children. Actually, they don't want to be caught for the most part. They do tease the law enforcement a lot, but they usually don't get killed by the law enforcement just like spree killers and mass murderers do. I could be wrong, but this is what I remember from what I've studied. Don, are you still with us, or has he
I think he's having technical difficulties. He may have to restart his computer.
Oh, I see. All right, that's not a problem. Well, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and bring John
Don,
Cameron.
Go. Yeah, that sounds good. Don, go ahead and take your time and restart.
That's okay.
And sorry about that, everyone.
Well, tonight we will be speaking with John Cameron, who is a 53-year-old retired police detective from Great Falls, Montana. His career in law enforcement began in 1979. He retired in 2005 as a sergeant of detectives working cold cases. He has worked on FBI serial killer task force, catching ritualistic child cannibal killer Nathan Bar Jonah. His cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Dateline NBC, and he helped produce a series known as Most Evil on True TV. In 2010, while working as an analyst for the Montana Board of Pardons and Parole in Deer Lodge Prison, Montana, he was in a position to access information that had been kept secret for 55 years, unraveling the most intelligent serial killer ever. John Cameron is the author of the book, It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. By rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. That is how Edward Wayne Edwards killed hundreds of innocent victims over a 66-year murderous career. And he was never caught. Never heard of Edward Wayne Edwards? No? Well, you will now. Welcome to the show, John Cameron.
Thank you, Monique, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on.
Thank you so much. So what do you think about my explanation of a profile of a serial killer? Did I miss anything?
Well, Edwards kind of had all of those, everything you mentioned wrapped up in him. He was basically every serial killer there's ever been wrapped up in one, because he competed with every other serial killer. So yeah, you kind of nailed it as to what they are. They're always right in front of you. They're always very charming, and they don't want to get caught, but they want to tease you. And that's what Edward Edwards did for 66 years.
Right. And isn't that also true that they kind of choose certain type of people, whether it's the prostitutes or like Ted Bundy, he chose women with dark hair that parted in the middle. And Jeffrey Dahmer chose a lot of men, young men. He killed them that way. I don't know. I think that they are very narcissistic. That's one of the characteristics that I thought a serial killer always has. But they don't always stop at 35. 24 to 35 is an average age, but there are a lot of variation.
Well, I think a lot of people also don't understand that such as a guy with Edwards, he survived undetected for so long. So a lot of the serial killer profiles didn't really fit him because he killed from age 11 all the way till he was 77 and was married 56 of those years to 3 different wives. So he had a completely different type of a style of who he would kill because he didn't have a specific victim. He killed all ages, all nationalities, everything.
Right. How does actually Edward Wayne Edwards, which is a very strange name to me, by the way, how does he fit the profile of a ritualistic serial killer?
Well, what happened with Mr. Edwards is when he was very young, at the age of 5, his mother was killed in front of him. His real name was Charles Meyer at that age. And after his mother was killed, he was placed into a Catholic orphanage, and his name was changed to Edward Wayne Edwards. And it was in the Catholic reformatory where he was abused by the nuns, the priests, and the older boys that he came out and decided to be a ritualistic killer. And what I mean by that is he took everything the Catholic Church taught him and would have many of his victims play out some of the scenes, such as the crucifixion or the Stations of the Cross or the beating of Jesus. And he took it all to the dark side and then would leave ritualistic clues either at the scene or in letters and false phone calls to the police.
John, another thing that I was just thinking when you were talking about this, when serial killers start at such a young age, they usually they wet their beds, right? They kill a lot of animals. They're very cruel to animals. Did Edward has the same kind of characteristics as a young child before his mother died?
Yeah, he did actually. And it was after his mother died that all these characteristics started to come out. When he went into the orphanage, he started wetting the bed. When he escaped the orphanage, he burned a Bible in a Catholic church. He burned down buildings. He sexually molested boys and girls. He was really deviant by the age of 13, where he was actually officially diagnosed as a sadomasochist at age 13.
Wow. And he seemed like he wanted to be recognized for something.
The recognition is something that he always preached throughout his life. He would preach that he was a reformed criminal, that he used to be a really bad guy, and that he used to be into crime for recognition. But what he meant by that is, by being recognized, is that he was destroyed by age 5 after his mother was shot and his name was changed, and then he was raped and beat. That he never really had a mother and father. He never got any recognition from anybody or any love. And so his recognition would be to go out and kill people in horrific murders that would just completely terrorize a community, and then taunt the community with letters and false phone calls. And that would be his recognition, would be to pick up the paper every day, and one of his murders would be playing out in the paper, and he could just relive them every moment in the paper, every day of his life.
Right. That's really interesting. When I read your book, and you were talking about his mother killing herself or suicide by a rifle in her stomach, I find that fascinating because as a forensic investigator, I have a hard time understanding how someone can kill themselves. And of course, you in law enforcement, how did that happen? Because of the position of the rifle, wouldn't that be almost impossible to do that?
Yes, and this happened in 1938. Edwards was 5 years old. Yeah. And the death certificate listed it as a suicide. But what's very strange is Edwards was named after his grandfather, his mother's father, who was Charles Meyer. And so once his mother is shot, they change his name and stick him in an orphanage. And I believe the reason is that it wasn't a suicide. He had not known his mother until she came out of prison at the age of 4. And within the first year, she dies of a gunshot wound, and he's in the house. And they change his name. I suspect that he killed her, and they got rid of him and stuck him in the orphanage. And
Are you saying that at age 5?
Yeah, he was 5 years old when she died in front of him with that gunshot. And it was suspicious. It was a rifle. It was to the stomach. And she lived 6 days and then died of sepsis. And he will kill repeatedly between those 6 days throughout his life, August 2nd through August 8th, just over and over again. And what he would kill is people parked in cars, making him a child not born of love, and no mother, no father, and conceived in the backseat of a car.
Right. Well, that sounds like some of the characteristics of a Zodiac killer.
Yeah, that's exactly who he is, and that's how the investigation played out after I connected him to a Lover's Lane murder in Great Falls, Montana, where I live here. That happened in 1956, and once I connected him to that, I knew that he'd been killing since at least 1956, and he didn't get caught till 2010.
Okay, let's go back a little bit so our listeners can follow us. Because your book is one of the most unbelievable, absolutely well-written. I absolutely enjoyed all the pictures and evidence of everything that you got. You included in this book. That was really good.
That's what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be a police investigation to kind of lay the evidence out so the public can see it. And then they can also go online and look at all of the stuff he left. He left it in the public domain his whole life as a taunt.
Mm-hmm. Well, how is it possible that one man could have done everything you've put in your book and on your website?
Yeah, people, when I began this investigation in 2010, they said that I would lose all credibility if I kept bringing up the murders that this man was starting to fall into. But what people have to understand is Edward Edwards never got caught for murder until he was 77 years old. And when he finally got caught, he confessed to 5 murders over 20 years span. And 4 of them were lovers on lovers' lanes, which was the same type that I had in Montana in 56. And so once I found out that he'd been killing since 1956, didn't get caught till 2010, I then found out that he wrote a book. And the book was an autobiography of his life from age 1 all the way up till age 38 when he came out and did the Zodiac case. He claimed that he had reformed in 1968, but what he had actually done is he had come out and become the worst serial killer ever in 1968 and started the Zodiac and then killed all the way through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and all the way up to 2009.
So basically, he has been killing all those years, and you connected him to very important. I mean, I don't want to talk about it yet because I want to give a little background, but that's very fascinating. Okay, so let's just start a little bit from the beginning still. Tell me, how could a 13-year-old boy perfectly dissect a 22-year-old woman?
Yeah, and what you're referring to there is Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, in January of 1947. And when I first started the investigation of Edward Edwards in 2010, I had no idea where it was going to lead. But what I found out is after I just followed the evidence, it went back to the beginning and when he started killing. And that was in 1945 in Chicago at age 11. And Elizabeth Short, the gal that was cut up in the parking lot.
The Black Dahlia. Yeah, I saw the movie actually, but that's a very famous case. So she was cut right in the middle. She was cut in two.
It's one of the most famous cases. Yeah, she was cut in two and laid out in a park, and her body drained of blood. Her breasts had been removed. And the killer taunted the press with cryptic letters and phone calls, and they never caught him. But in the end, in 2002, when Edwards was 69 years old, he actually produced a website that was the solution to the Black Dahlia killing. And it's called blackdahliasolution.org. And anybody can go on it, but Edwards actually posted that website up in 2002, and it was the beginning of his killings as a taunt, just like his book and all of the Zodiac letters were taunts. The website was the solution. All you had to do is identify who the writer was, and there's actually a picture of Edward Edwards with Elizabeth Short in the photo booth at age 13 and a half, just before he killed her.
Oh, wow. And so while we're talking about how did that affect you when you actually put two and two together in regards to this woman, Black Dahlia?
Well, I was never really interested in following the Black Dahlia case. I'd heard of the name of it before. I never understood what it was. I didn't look it up. But what tied to the Black Dahlia case was the killing of a little 6-year-old girl named Suzanne Dignan in Chicago, who in January of 1946 was lured out of her house at night while her parents were asleep. A ransom note was left. She was brought into a basement. She was beheaded. And then the killer teased the press with lipstick messages and other false letters trying to catch me. And it was actually the 1946 killing of little 6-year-old Suzanne Dignan that really began to unravel what Edwards had done. Mm-hmm. That was one of his first murders, was Suzanne Dignan, 1946. Mm-hmm. And one of his last murders in his 50 years of killing between 46 and 96 was 6-year-old Joan Benet Ramsey. And it was exactly 50 years later to the year that he did that. And he posted all of this on blackdahliasolution.org, that he was the killer. And he used the name Edward Burns throughout the website, because that's actually the name he used in 1947 when he checked into the motel with Elizabeth Short. Only it was Edward Barnes. And that's where he dissected her in a bathtub, put her, and he actually explains all this on the website. He dissected her in the bathtub, placed her in her own luggage, put her in the back of his car, brought her to the park, and laid her out.
I'm shocked. I'm just listening to you, even though, there's so much detail in your book, but all these names. By the way, why did you quit your job, or were you let go, or did you quit your job with the Montana Board of Pardons and Paroles in 2011? What happened?
Well, I was working for the Board of Pardons in Deer Lodge Prison in 2010, and that's when I was introduced to Mr. Edwards, and I decided to confront him and see if he'd confess to a double murder here in Great Falls that happened in 56. Mm-hmm. And from there, it turned into a big game of letter writing and phone calls between him and I as to how many murders he had actually done. And I loved my job at the parole board, but I got a letter in March of 2011 from them that basically they told me that if I continued to follow Ed Edwards, that I couldn't work for the parole board anymore.
I see.
And so I quit, and I decided that I would follow Ed Edwards' life from beginning to end, because I knew that no law enforcement agency had ever done that in 2010, and I knew that. And I couldn't let it go, actually. I'm a former cold case detective. I love murder cases. I had an unsolved double murder that he did here for sure.
Right.
And then from there, you just had to follow the evidence that he had actually laid out his whole life for someone to do, but he was very intelligent, and he wanted somebody to challenge him.
Right. I saw that he wrote, The Metamorphosis of a Criminal. Which seems like, what is that about? He told the whole world that he's a criminal, everything but murderer.
Well, this is very important, because the book that he published in 1972 is titled Metamorphosis of a Criminal, but it says right on the front cover that he was on the FBI's list of the 10 most wanted criminals. He was a hold-up man, a bank robber, a dangerous character. He spent 14 years in 5 jails. Now he is a writer, a respected citizen, and the head of a family of 5. Metamorphosis of a Criminal, the true life story of Ed Edwards. And on the front of the cover, there's a bad guy in the left side holding a gun ready to kill. Yeah. And on the bottom right side is a doctor carrying his attaché case.
Yeah.
And that book was basically a puzzle of all the murders he did from 1945 until he rehabilitated in 1968.
According to himself, rehabilitated.
According to himself, right. But actually the murder of Elizabeth Short is in the book. The murder of Suzanne Dignan is in the book. The Great Falls double murder was in the book. Every murder that he did that he considered crimes of recognition, such as Dr. Sam Shepard and his wife Marilyn in 1954, they were in the book. Not named, but the murders themselves described, but not called murders, called beatings or robberies or burglaries.
Oh, I was just going to ask that. So basically, there's no way he would have said that I killed him and still the book will be published and he won't be arrested.
Right. His famous quote in the book was when he was getting rid of a woman or somebody, he would put him on the bus. And that's what he would repeat throughout the book, is that he put him on the bus. But what it really meant was he had killed him. It was a taunt. And he was the Zodiac Killer. And that's what the Zodiac Killer did in 1968 and 69, was taunt everybody with his identity through letters. And the book
and when you say about the letters that for the Zodiac Killer, it was very connected to Egyptian language. What is that? How does that connect to Zodiac Killer?
Well, the Zodiac Killer sent cryptic messages in 68 and 69, and much of it was written in ancient Egyptian historical languages, such as Old Norse, Some of it was Greek, Chinese, and some of the cryptograms that Edwards actually wrote in the Zodiac case were symbols from his name put in mirror image and used as almost hieroglyphics. So you could have never figured out the Zodiac killer's puzzles until you knew the name of the killer himself, Edward Edwards. Mm-hmm. And that's really what happened in 2010 here in Great Falls once we identified Edwards as the Zodiac killer. And a friend of mine who was highly intelligent and had studied all of these Egyptian history and satanic verses that Edwards had studied, cracked all of his codes, and we confronted Edwards with that. And we were right. Edwards was running around his whole life portraying Satan, and that's really what the Zodiac cryptogram said after we cracked it, that he felt that he was the most intelligent killer ever, and he sought revenge on society, and he did it his whole life just by killing people. And when he said in the Salt cryptogram in the Zodiac case that he was killing slaves for his afterlife, well, he actually put that quote right in his book.
That is crazy.
That began the unraveling of what the book was.
Now, the Zodiac killer was a cold case, wasn't it? I mean, nobody got caught, finally. Until you connected Edward Wayne Edwards to the Zodiac killer. Is that true? I mean, I'm not sure.
Well, many people have been destroyed personally, being called a Zodiac killer by the press throughout their lives. Arthur Lee Allen. There's been many books written that my father was the Zodiac or things like that.
Right.
But that really was Edward's MO throughout life, was to kill and steer the evidence towards someone else, and so he could watch the system kill and destroy those people too. So, yeah, the Zodiac killer was never caught, but he did say, the Zodiac killer did tell one of his surviving victims that he had been in Deer Lodge prison, that he had stolen a car, that he had killed a guard, and that he was headed to Mexico. And Edwards had done every one of those 4 things. And the only problem in 1969 when they were trying to find the Zodiac killer is that Edwards had been in Deer Lodge prison in 1956, 13 years before he came out and did the Zodiac killing. So they didn't understand. They looked for the Zodiac killer in Deer Lodge prison in 68 and 69, but they didn't find him. It's because he had been there in 1956 to 59.
Well, I'm not sure why I'm having... One second.
Hey, well, there's a break.
Interestingly enough, my cell phone all of a sudden started just talking by itself. Very strange. I apologize. Don, if you have sound, I know that you have a couple of questions that you want to ask. So why don't you, I know that you wanted to ask, for example, how did he choose his victims and why? Do you have sound? You want to ask him yourself?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. Great. Well, that's a big question is, in looking at your book and in hearing you speak, you sound so sure of these connections. And for the skeptical public, for people who are listening, what is it that makes it so clear that he's so interconnected with these murders? So you mentioned that he mentions these murders in his book. So you're saying that he sort of chronicles all these murders by describing them in a different way, and people didn't see that these were those murders? Did he use their names? And then how does he choose? How does Edward Wayne Edwards decide to murder? Why does he murder? How does he choose his victims? Is there any connection here?
Well, yes. Let's start with the book, because that is the most important part of the whole thing. If you just took his book and what cities he said he was at when he was there, and you had access to his NCIC criminal records, which I had, the murders would be revealed, because he places himself in the cities of the murders at the time they happened, but he doesn't talk about murder. He just talks about beatings and horrible things he does to women, but he places himself in the cities at the time of the murder. And from 1945 all the way up to 68, he places himself in the cities where I connected him to murders over and over again. But as for picking his victims, he always picked his victims very deliberately. Sometimes he waited 30 years before he killed somebody, but he would plan each murder to tie to the next murder. And that's why it took so long to unravel. I started this in 2010, and he'd already confessed to 5 murders, and then I tied him to 2 more. Well, he had been killing for 66 years, it turns out. and taunting authorities with his identity his whole life. So the evidence was always out there, such as the letters and the bloggings later on in life are incredible. But then he also wrote the books, he wrote movie scripts, he appeared in movies, he appeared at funerals of his victims, he appeared on national TV taunting America after he killed the Zodiac to tell the truth. He was always out in front of everybody. His ruse was to be a private investigator, a preacher, and a doctor of psychiatry. So he always had access to every one of his victims because they trusted him. And so he would first groom his way into the family in every case. Some were random, but the crimes of recognition that I tied him to were always pre-planned and tied to the next one.
Have you been able to go back to some of these families and see if you can, or you're saying that he was at funerals, have you been able to find photographs of him at these events? Has anyone tied him to coming to the door as a private investigator after the fact? Now that you've, nailed it?
He appears in Life magazine in 1955 over the funeral of the 3 boys he killed in Robinson Woods Park in Chicago in 1955. And
you mean in the background pictures?
He's in the standing right behind the family. He also appeared at the funeral or at the cemetery of the West Memphis 3 while they were filming the Paradise Lost HBO documentary regarding the West Memphis 3 killing in 93. And for a 10-second shot, Edward Edwards is in the chapter titled Christmas, standing behind the grave, holding the actual murder weapon, the cane.
Which is very usual thing for serial killers to do. Most criminals, especially serial killers, they tie themselves in and show up at the scene of crime or afterward, or when the law enforcement shows up. They just love seeing that action behind the scene, right?
Yeah, it was the recognition is what he sought, and
exactly.
That meant that he would kill, and then he would stand in front of the police officers who were his friends everywhere, but they didn't know who he was. He was always under assumed identity, and he was always with a wife and children. So even if he was standing at the scene of a murder while they were processing it, they wouldn't suspect him because he didn't look like a killer. He looked like a family man. But he actually took his children in 1980 to a double murder that he had committed and pretended to find it. And so that kind of began the unraveling of what he would do. His daughter told me this, that she remembered him taking her and her brothers to this double murder scene and claiming that there were bodies. And it was the way he got off. He did it his whole life in every decade. And I know that I have all these high-profile murders, and everybody's saying, how could one person do that? Well, if one person who was diagnosed as a sadomasochist at 13 with an incredible IQ and didn't get caught till he was 77, of course he could do that. And traveled the country everywhere. I mean, everywhere. He killed in every state. He was everywhere. Through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, he never stayed in one spot.
Mm-hmm. John, you said that Edwards killed JonBenét Ramsey because that was a big mystery for everyone. I mean, I was kind of shocked to see that you connected Wayne Edwards to JonBenét Ramsey. Now, why do you think a man that shoots couples on Lover's Lane would pick a 6-year-old girl?
Yeah, that's exactly what everybody was very confused about in 2010 when I started this. But once we connected Edwards to being the Zodiac Killer, and that was in August of 2010, well, then we knew that he was a writer, and we knew that he liked to write puzzles, and we knew that the JonBenét Ramsey ransom note was a puzzle, because the whole thing doesn't make sense. And it was the signature on the JonBenét ransom note that actually started the unraveling of Edwards killing JonBenét. And that signature on the ransom note was Victory, a Christian phrase, and the initials SBTC, which actually meant signed by the cross, the Zodiac cross, the way Edward signed every one of his Zodiac letters. But he couldn't sign it with the Zodiac cross and circle, otherwise it would be too obvious that the Zodiac killed JonBenét. So he signed it SBTC, signed by the cross. But the ransom note itself was a complete history of Edwards' life and the Zodiac Killer's life. If you read the ransom note yourself, you'll find that there are quotes from movies called Scorpio, which were based on the Zodiac. And that's why he put it. Yeah, put them in there to tie the note to the Zodiac. But it was the killing in 1946, which was the exact replica of JonBenet Ramsey, the little killing of 6-year-old Suzanne Dignan in Chicago in 1946 that he did. That led me also to JonBenet, because it was exactly 50 years later that he killed JonBenet in the same manner that he killed Suzanne Dignan. And then, in the end...
How old was Suzanne Dignan?
6 years old, little blonde-haired girl, 6 years old, killed January 7th, 1946.
Right.
And the ransom notes, even though they're not as long, they had the same amount of money being demanded.
Did you compare the handwriting analysis?
You know, there wasn't any point to comparing handwriting analysis with Ed Edwards anymore, because he was always changing it up. And the Zodiac Killer always said that. You know, he always said that he was changing up his writing. Well, he was. And of the dozen letters that I got from Edwards when I was communicating with him in 2010 and 11, he changed his handwriting up on every letter because it was a clue. I kept being smart with him, thinking that I was pretty cool. I caught the Zodiac Killer, and he kept telling me, oh, no, you didn't. You have no idea who this guy is. You have no idea what I've done. He kept telling me that there were so many more, and there was so much more to the story, and there was.
John, how did you come to communicate with him in prison? I mean, what was the beginning of your communication with him? That's very rare to even get to that point.
Well, it was after my friend Neil cracked the Zodiac Killer's identity cipher, which was a 13-character cipher the Zodiac Killer sent on April 20th, 1970. And that happens to be the anniversary of the Deer Lodge prison riot that Edwards had lived through. And Edward Edwards is 13 characters, and the identity cipher was 13 characters. And once we figured out that he was satanic and what he was doing, my friend figured the identity cipher out, and we confronted Edwards with it. And we were right. Edward Edwards was the Zodiac Killer, and he had used his own name in mirror image in some of his letters in his name and created the identity cipher. So nobody could have ever figured that identity cipher out until they knew the name Edward Edwards. And so once we confronted him with that, he sent us a letter back right away, and he connected with my friend Neil. And for 8 to 9 months, we kind of played a game of good guy, bad guy. I was the bad cop, Neil was the good cop, and we were playing Mr. Edwards, and he was playing us. Right. He knew that we were right, that we had gotten the Zodiac, but he kept telling us that we didn't know the whole story. Yeah,
I see. And what year was that? That was 2010, did you say?
Yeah, it started in June of 2010, and then he died April of 2011.
Right. Because he was arrested in 2011 when finally he gave up, and the law enforcement went to the house and arrested him when he was on a chair, right? He was actually handicapped, wasn't he, at that point? Age 77 or something?
Yeah, he looks pretty horrible. You can go online. You can see him when he's arrested on YouTube. But that was also a ruse. He was never in a wheelchair up until the point that he got arrested and decided that he wasn't going to walk or anything. He made them fly him from Wisconsin down to Ohio. He sat in that wheelchair the whole time, but he had never been in a real wheelchair his whole life. That was another part of his ruse, to be able to stand in front of everybody, and nobody would think that this old fat guy could be this type of a killer. And that was part of his ruse. And everybody thought that in 2010 when they saw him. They said, oh, there's no way this man could be much of anything. But he had just confessed to 5 murders spanning 20 years. And I guess at that time I couldn't understand why they weren't paying attention to him. But it turned out the reason that police officers all over didn't really get too excited about Mr. Edwards is he was an informant for them for years and decades, and had been supplying information on his own murders to steer the evidence towards innocent people, and then they would arrest the innocent people.
Right. Don, you have several questions. Go ahead. I'll give you the floor.
Sure. Okay. How was it that he was an informant, or how did he get involved with these identity changes and false identities?
When they arrested him in 2009, they actually recovered the false credentials in the machine to make the false credentials. And he had been doing it his whole life. he made his kids and his wife and everybody not use their names if they moved and they were hiding. And he just would always tell anybody when he was under assumed name to just call him Wayne, because that was his middle name. So regardless of what name he was under, he was always called Wayne. And so he would never forget his identity because everybody just called him that. But he traveled, he lived in Ohio, Colorado, Arizona, Florida, New Mexico, Michigan.
So what did he do for work and for money? I mean, it sounds like, he killed in every state. He traveled a lot. He moved around with a family. But to go kill people, abduct them, it takes time. You have to get away from the family. He needs alibis to give the family. And it also probably costs a bit of money. I mean, of course, some duct tape and a knife. But, okay, so it's still going to cost him to travel, to gas, to hide evidence. How did he do this, and what did it cost him, and what careers did he have?
So, well, Edwards was a family man, so he had 5 children and a wife from 1968 until his capture. But he was not Christian, and his wife and his children were. On any Christian holiday, he was not around. Christmas, Easter, Halloween, All Saints Day, any of those days he was not around because he was out killing. They didn't know that. But to fund his killings, he actually lured people in. In 96, he lured a man in, insured him, killed him, and collected $250,000. And he would do this repeatedly over and over throughout his life. Insurance fraud, burglary, robbery. He never worked. He never had a job that lasted any time. He claims in some of the videos that he was a construction worker, but he really was never worked anywhere. He was fired just before the Zodiac started in 1968 from a trucking company in Ohio. And his wife didn't even know he had been fired. She thought he was a long-haul truck driver, but what he would do is he'd purchase plane tickets. He flew to his murder sites. He drove, he took trains, he took buses, he took taxis. He did everything, and it was always about planning the murder his entire life, every waking moment.
So he would get the money from where then, if he went job to job, and what was his ability to purchase these airline tickets? And
fraud, just a lot of fraud. He details it actually in his book. He details the way he frauded the airlines from 1952 all the way up till he rehabilitated in 68. He details it all in his book. And it turns out that's exactly what he had been doing even after 1968, that he would just purchase tickets under assumed identity. He always had lots of money, but his family was kept in squalor. They were kept in very poor conditions and abused and just going with the program of what was going on.
Have you interviewed his family? You said you talked to his daughter. Have they been cooperating and giving you a background?
Yeah, I went out in 2010 and met with the kids and his wife, and then I met his other wives that he had when he was here in Great Falls, Montana in 1956, who nobody had interviewed the wife that he had in Great Falls in 1956 until I interviewed her in 2011, and it turns out he had taken her all over the country for 8 months, 1955 and 56, killing in these horrific murders everywhere, Chicago, California, Montana, Iowa, Ohio.
So were you able to piece together some of his locations from these ex-wives and the family that overlapped with the murders?
Yeah, they were the ones that actually placed him in Boulder, Colorado in 1996 when JonBenét Ramsey was killed. That she was killed on Christmas, and he was never around on Christmas because Christmas in 96 he was hiding out near Boulder, Colorado. He had a son that was in the Air Force, and he had another son that was in the Army. He had a daughter that was a teacher, and he had another son that was going to be a police officer.
Wow.
I wanted to ask you, actually, John, I don't know, maybe some of these things that you have said already explained what Edward's MO was, but usually serial killers have a certain type of MO. What was exactly his? How did he get people to come to him? How did he kidnap them? How did he kill them? What was his what kind of weapon of choice did he have? Here you explained that he burned, stabbed, killed, many different ways. So tell me.
Yeah, let's just take one case, for instance. Let's just say that Edwards decides he's going to kill a pregnant woman. And he did this repeatedly throughout his life in bathtubs and in beds. Either beat him to death or drowned him. But what he would do is he would pick the woman intentionally and try to find the woman who has a cheating husband or a husband who's willing to cheat. And then he would tempt the husband with, offer him sex from a hooker or offer him whatever the ruse is going to be, whatever the sin he's going to get this husband to do. And then he's going to get that husband to go ahead, cheat on his wife, and then kill his wife. And it's going to look like he did it. And he did this over and over again. So that way it would look like it was an inside job. It was the family that did it. It was John and Patsy Ramsey that did it. Or it was Dr. Sam Shepard that killed his wife, Marilyn Shepard. Or it was always a family member. Or in the West Memphis 3 case, it was the father that must have did it. Get them to sin, get them to cheat, kill someone close to them, and then steer the evidence through false letters, evidence left at the scene that might tie to a family member, such as the JonBenét Ramsey ransom note, and watch the system destruct the innocent people too. So he could kill people and watch the system kill people.
Right.
And in some cases, they'd actually get arrested. And in one case, just before he came to Great Falls in 1956, a guy got executed down in California in San Quentin for a murder that Edwards had actually done. And that's why he came out as the executioner in 1968, as the Zodiac, wearing the executioner's hood. He had gotten a man executed in California 13 years earlier, and he was going to go down there and seek revenge. And he said that in a letter he sent to the judge in 1956, and that's in the book. He would always taunt the judges and the court systems after a wrongful conviction to rub it in their faces.
So he was arrested many times and he got out many times. How did he slip? I mean, how did he slip through the cracks so many times?
Every time he was arrested. He was arrested in 1951. He informed to the FBI on communist sympathizers.
Right.
He was arrested in 1953. He was released early. He was arrested in Montana in 1956. He was released 3 years early after he paid off an analyst for the Montana Parole Board. He was arrested again in Portland, Oregon, and he was suspected of a double murder, but he started informing again and got a short sentence.
Right.
And he was released from prison just less than 1 year before the Zodiac killing started, and he'd actually killed a whole family of 6 in Michigan in July of 1968, just before he did the Zodiac.
Did they tie all these killings to him? I mean, did you tie all these killings to him? Because I do know that at the end of your book, you talk about the victims, of course, almost 99 or 100 people. And then you also have the wrongfully convicted still alive, which you said that there are 12 known inmates in 10 different states currently serving time for murders committed by Wayne Edwards. And here are the names. One of those people seemed very suspicious to me, which is Scott Peterson of Modesto, California, who was found guilty of killing his pregnant wife, Laci Peterson, in 2004. And he was sentenced to death in San Quentin. So my question is that how did you are you saying that he was the one who killed Laci Peterson instead of Scott?
Yes. Yeah, he is. And, and I would have said Scott Peterson was guilty a year ago. Scott Peterson's not in the book, other than his name and Laci's name are in the book, because I had to finish the book and get it out before I could even write anything on that case. So that's going to have to be part of the second book. But
right.
Laci Peterson was killed on Christmas Eve, and she was pregnant. And Scott was a cheating husband, and he targeted that family to kill and set the evidence towards Scott, and it worked. And in the end, he actually basically confesses to killing Laci Peterson on the web blogs that he posted on ZodiacKiller.com for 7 or 8 years. He was taunting everybody on ZodiacKiller.com for years to try to identify him. He would actually blog against them as they would bring up the murders, such as Scott Peterson. But there's some letters in the Scott Peterson case that were sent in April of 2004, just before the trial started. And it's those letters that have been sealed by the judge that I've been trying to get get from Freedom of Information requests, but I'm having no luck. But those 3 letters that were sent in April of 2004 to the judge are going to be letters that are going to be written by Edward Edwards, just on the information I was able to get as to what they've said. Edwards would always taunt the court systems just before the trial of the innocent people. And just after Scott Peterson's trial, or just after Amber Fry testified, if you remember the Scott Peterson trial, Amber Fry was the girl he was having the affair with.
Yeah, the girlfriend, yes.
Right after Amber Fry testified and basically convicted Scott and knew that he was going to get convicted after that, Edwards killed another couple on a beach up in California. And that was a revenge killing. And that's how this man worked. Whenever somebody else would get convicted of one of his murders, he'd return to that area and kill again. And just because he might kill a 6-year-old girl here, and a couple in a lover's lane here, and a girl in a bathtub here, and a pregnant woman in a bedroom here, that was his MO. It didn't really matter who the victim was. He just had to kill them. So he targeted his victims with a very specific plan, and that was to tie each murder together. And Laci Peterson was actually placed, Ann Channer placed, in the Bay Area on April 13th and 14th of 2003. And that happened to be the birthday of Chandra Levy, who Edwards had actually killed the year earlier in 2001 and got away with it and set up a man. And was also from Modesto, like Laci Peterson.
Right.
So Edwards targeted Modesto, California, his whole life since 1956. After they
now, why is that? Why do you think that is?
Because 1955, in April of 1955, Edwards kidnapped a little 14-year-old girl down there, hid her body, and then planted it at a guy's cabin. A few months later, they arrested him, they tried him, they convicted him, and he was executed in San Quentin Prison. The exact prison that Scott Peterson's going to be executed in. And that was the whole intention, was to get somebody executed and get San Quentin and California to do it again. And they did it over and over and over again, actually.
My God. So there's 3 people. I see here that there are 3 people that actually did get convicted and executed for his crimes. That's one of them.
That is one of them. Burton Abbott. That was actually Governor Jerry Brown of California. It was his father that was the state attorney general on that case in 1956.
Right. You're talking about Burton Abbott in Berkeley, California, was executed March 17, 1957. Carl Jorgensen, which in 1960, killing of Larry Payton and Beverly Allen on a lover's lane, right?
No, they were convicted but not executed. But they were actually tried and convicted during the Zodiac killings. So during the Zodiac killings, 3 men are being tried for one of Edwards's Lover Lane's murders, and they get convicted. And that's another reason why he was killing and up and down the 101 between Washington, Oregon, and California.
And so at this time, are you saying that since your book came out, Scott Peterson, possibly, and all those people that you were talking about here that were convicted for his crimes, are they going to be exonerated?
Well, that was the purpose of putting the book out. At the first 2 years, I spent a lot of time trying to get the attorneys, the prosecutors, the police to get on board, but basically I got shunned. Most people don't even want to hear it. They think you're nuts as soon as you start bringing up these cases because they've lived in infamy for so long. Everybody has their own opinion about them. But the book itself is put out there so that people can get out of prison. Father Gerald Robinson, who was arrested for one of Edwards's murders, he just died July 4th of this year in prison, and he was innocent. There's others, Stobart Holt in Florida. I have suspicions that he may get out within the year. But I'll tell you, once somebody's convicted, they can't get out. And
it's very difficult.
And there's no law enforcement agency that's going to ever investigate Edward Edwards. He's dead, and nobody's going to investigate him. That's why I did.
Right. So how did this whole thing affect your life, your own personal life? And why did the law enforcement have such a resistance toward wanting to solve these crimes? These are all cold cases, just staying where they are while you went in and you opened everything. Obviously, they don't want to hear it because why?
Well, many times they've already convicted an innocent person, or somebody's killed themselves from the harassment they got.
Right, case closed.
Yeah, case closed. And so it's the police officers that were in charge of those cases aren't going to investigate them over again after they convicted somebody. And there's not a federal agency that's going to investigate them because he was an FBI informant for all those years. He was a paid informant. He got out of prison early for his informing, and it's all on public record. It can be found by anybody on the internet. That's what was so interesting about Edwards, is that he made sure that it would always be out there, especially after the internet came out. That's why he printed books at first, before the internet. When the internet came out, he put it all out there and just wanted to see if somebody was going to be smart enough to catch him.
So, bottom line, he actually did want to be caught. I mean, at some point he was tired of all this.
Yeah, and actually in 1997, after he killed Joan Benet, he actually makes a pretty good confession on Google Blogs that he really did want to retire in 1996 after killing Joan Benet. But he didn't, because from 96 until his capture in 2009, he killed at least 10 or 11 people that were major crimes of recognition that everybody knew about.
Don is asking, what kind of revenge? What do you mean, Don?
Well, I just keep coming up with all kinds of questions as you talk. I was wondering, there's some lingering thoughts. You know, you say he was informant. How did he inform? Did he inform in prisons? What kind of? You said he killed for revenge, but you know, do the judges get wrongfully convict somebody and then he's going to do a backlash? It doesn't quite fit or make sense to me. Can you explain a little better?
Yeah, the revenge part doesn't make sense to anybody. It's like, why would a guy kill somebody, set somebody up, watch that person get executed or sent to life, and then want to go exact revenge for them doing that on something that he did? But that's what he liked.
Yeah.
That's what he liked to do.
Well, John, stand by. We'll be right back after the break. We're going to about 5 minutes, so we'll be right back.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Hi, this is Bo.
And this is Rocco.
And the Bo and Rocco Show is here to offer insight into legal and lawful remedies. Our goal is to remain free and help others remain free in an ever-increasing police-like state. With the help of our guests, we try to answer questions such as what went wrong and what can we do about it.
So tune into Revolution Radio at www.freedomslips.com Wednesday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to listen to the Bo and Rocco Show.
You don't need to expect us.
We're already here.
Revolution Radio.
an anarcho-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week.
Yes.
But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting.
Yes, I see.
By a civil majority in the case of purely internal affairs.
Be quiet.
But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more
Be quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! It's just a flesh wound.
I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, and stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible.
You're a loony.
The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Revolution Radio.
You don't see it, do you? How close we are to absolute chaos? The sick ones are sitting on their fat asses, eating and drink themselves into a stupor, polluting the world without a second thought while it goes down the toilet. Nobody wants to do the nasty work. You know, the shit that we all just think about. Most good citizens are just along for the ride and then bitch and moan and complain about everything when it doesn't work out. Not me. Get it done.
Revolution Radio, where we do the nasty work. www.freedomslips.com. Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. If you plan to call in and speak with one of our hosts, please turn down your radio and separate yourself from any background noise and wait for the area code to be called on before you speak. And don't forget, Revolution Radio freedomslips.com is listener supported. So stop by the homepage, freedomslips.com, visit the site support area to help support the host you're listening to's airtime. Thank you. Revolution Radio freedomslips.com, where the truth never sleeps. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Okay, welcome back everyone to Private Eye Matrix Revealed on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Again, I'm your host, Private Investigator Monique Lissan, and we are talking to John Cameron, the author of It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. You can buy his book at any bookstore. I'm pretty sure you can buy it at Amazon.com. By the way, John, welcome back, first of all.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And do you have a website that you can give out?
Yes, if everybody goes to coldcasecameron.com. That's COLD Cameron.com. And actually, there's a timeline of all of his murders on that website, and you can purchase the book on that website also. But the website is kind of an addendum to the book. A lot of murders were brought to my attention since releasing the book, so the website and the timeline of Mr. Edwards' killings is growing pretty much daily on there.
Okay, I'm going to repeat that. So it's www.coldcasecameron.com?
That's it.
Okay, I just put it on chat, and later today or tonight I'm going to put it on Facebook as well. Please, Joe, if you wouldn't mind, put it on chat for me. It's probably done already.
I
Joe,
am in the process, but send for it.
Okay. I do want to ask Joe to, before we go back to speaking with John, would you please announce what Nighthawk has been sending out to everyone? I didn't get that memo. Joe?
Yeah, I'm here. What do you... I'm sorry, I missed the question there. I'm sorry.
asking that we mention to people that there's an archive you can subscribe to for $5 a month for Revolution Radio, and that it's all listener-supported, volunteer, and nobody gets paid. So this is all supported by the public efforts and donations. So people can go to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com and donate, or help, donate to the shows that you like and keep us on the air.
Absolutely. So that's actually the one that I always announce. But there was another one that you just mentioned, which is $5 subscription for the archives. Is that $5 per month, Joe?
Yeah, that's $5 a month per subscription, and that gives you obviously the archives for the entire history of the station.
I see. Okay, so from now on, I'll be announcing that as well.
If someone wants to go to the station and donate $5, $10, $20, you might as well donate the $5 and get a subscription out of it as well.
I see. Very good.
So please go ahead and get your subscriptions.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Monique.
Absolutely. So again, for anyone who wants to actually call us at this hour, call us at 347-688-2902 or Skype us at Freedom Scream. And thank you, Don, for announcing that, by the way. I really appreciate that. Okay, John, we were talking about a lot of things, but one of the questions that I asked you before we went on a break was that this must have affected your personal life. Are you married by any chance?
No, I've been divorced for about 13 years and kind of probably got divorced because of my job working on homicide cases and, just not paying attention to the family. But there's no way I could have been married to anybody during this last 4 years with Mr. Edwards. It would have been a disaster. So no, I'm staying single, just working on this. It definitely affected my life.
Right.
Lost my job, which I really did love, but it was the smartest move I ever made, because had I not done it, nobody would have ever found any of this out. Maybe they would, 100 years from now if somebody else did it. But I was just in the right position working in Deer Lodge Prison and had privy to his older records that showed that he was a serial killer when he was in my hometown in 56.
So basically in 2011 when you quit your job was because had you stayed, you would have been caught up in the bureaucracy of the law enforcement. Is that correct?
Well, what had happened is I had already determined that Edward had killed a couple in Portland, Oregon, and that 3 men were wrongfully convicted. And so I contacted the Oregon prosecutor's office to let them know and try to convince them, and they complained to the parole board, and it was either you quit working on Mr. Edwards or you quit working for us. So I quit working for them.
Well, that's really strange. It just seems like sometimes law enforcement, instead of actually being more active in stopping the killings, they resisted. I don't know why that is.
Just like the horror movies, huh?
Well, they're a very close-knit group. I was a cop for 24 years, and they're a great group of people, but they're also very good at circling the wagons. And
they don't like to be wrong, eh?
No, and once you admit wrong, you admit liability. The fact is, Mr. Edwards was on federal parole from 1967 till 1977 and was allowed by his federal parole officer to travel all over the country claiming he was a reformed criminal, when in fact he was killing everywhere during that period of time. So the liability lies right on our government and our parole office. And that has been a major resistance to this. He was on parole for 10 years while he did some of the most horrific killings.
Wow, that's incredible. And I wanted to ask you, so did he actually in letters admit to any killings himself? Because he seems like unbelievable, like no serial killer I've ever read about or heard of. He seems not only narcissistic, he sets people up to be actually falling for his crimes or even executed or arrested for his crimes. And then he has no specific MO. He's not necessarily organized or disorganized killer. He doesn't have any particular type of victims that he goes after. Children, old people, lovers lane. We don't know. So he's very hard to detect, isn't he? Someone like him would be very hard to detect.
Yeah, that was the whole purpose of it. In fact, what he wanted to be was the undetectable serial killer. And in the end, he actually wrote about how he was the undetectable serial killer and what that meant. And what he meant was that he would change up his MO over and over again so that no two killings could ever be linked together, at least in a normal way, as we thought of for serial killers. But he made it clear that once a detective was able to link two of the murders together, they would understand his pathology. And those two crimes were the 1946 killing of Suzanne Dignan, 6-year-old girl, and the 1996 killing of JonBenét Ramsey, a 6-year-old girl, both sleeping in their house at night with ransom notes. Those were the two crimes he kept taunting everybody with on the blogs. Mm-hmm. Tie those two crimes together and you will have the real killer. And that's what happened here. He was the undetectable serial killer. He never left the same thing twice at the scene, although he would tie them together similarly, but always leave authorities wondering if they could be tied together.
Well, John, it seems like kind of catch-22 here. He seeked recognition, yet he didn't want to be detected. But how is he going to be recognized if he's going to be living in the background? Isn't that kind of controversial with each other?
Yeah, it is. And here's what he actually says in his own words. He does not care if his name goes down in the history books. He cares not a whit if after killing 500 people, nobody knows his name or even the fact that a single serial killer is responsible for the 500 killings. All he cares about is indulging his desire and need to kill. That's
he actually wrote that. Wow, that's amazing.
And 13 days after he killed JonBenét Ramsey. He posted that on Google Blogs under the name Undetectable Serial Killer, and he used the name Gen 1 Orbit and signed it Joe. But yeah, he had been blogging for 3-4 years on Google's blogs from 96 to 2000. And I didn't know any of this, and none of this is in the book from 96 to 99. This is an area that came up after I went on Coast to Coast Radio and received phone calls about some murders in Alabama that ended up opening up what Edwards was doing from 96 to 99, and that was he was out on Google Blogs challenging everybody to identify him. And they all thought they were blogging with a serial killer, but they couldn't identify him.
Wow. You know what? I'm also looking at the list of victims that you mentioned from 1980 to 1981. So I'm looking at, my God, Atlanta child murders. How many are there? I'm talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, more than 15 to 20 children. So he is responsible for Atlanta child murders as well, all through the 80s.
Yeah, those occurred 1979 to 81, just after he got off parole. And he was actually arrested in Atlanta right after the trial of Wayne Williams, who went down for some murders and then was named the Atlanta child killer. But Edwards was arrested in Atlanta right after the Atlanta child killings, and they found a Marietta, Georgia police uniform in his home. And that's what he had been using to gain access to the victims in Atlanta, was the police. He was the police officer. And I have a photograph of him with the captain of the Atlanta Police Department at the time of those killings. So he was right in front of them during the Atlanta child killings. And the whole reason, all of those killings were ritualistic. The children were killed. Some of them were actually held for days and then killed. And then he would lay them out in church parking lots, police parking lots, public places, just like Elizabeth Short in 1947.
Did he rape them? Did he molest them? Or were they mainly girls or boys or both?
They were both. They were beat. They were, he just beat them, and mainly, would beat them on the left side of the face, would stab them, would choke them, would burn them. He had to kill by knife, by rope, by gun, and by fire. And
did he sexually molest them as well?
If he did sexually molest them, he would do it with an object, like a crucifix. He would never rape, at least not a victim that he was going to kill, because that would have left too much evidence. If he was going to rape him, he'd do it with an object. JonBenét Ramsey was raped with an object.
Well, he seems like very organized kind of killer.
Well, I'm curious what he was arrested for, all these different arrests, especially down there. You seem on parole. He goes down to the state where the crime occurs. He's arrested there. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick rundown of all of his arrests. He was arrested for burglary, robbery, and kidnapping in the 50s. He was arrested for robbery and kidnapping in the 60s. He was arrested for arson and burglary in the 80s. And that's it. And every time he got out, he would inform on his killings, steering the evidence to someone he'd already steered it to, and get out early. He got out he got arrested in 1982 down in Atlanta, Georgia, right after the Atlanta child killings. He started informing and was released in 1986, and he immediately started killing again in the Virginia Parkway murders.
So wait a minute. You're saying that he gets arrested, and then because he's involved in these murders, he's done them and he's set people up, he starts seeding the evidence by informing on the very murders he committed to further add evidence against these people and convict them. But if you go back, he was an informant on multiple murders in different states at different times.
Yep, that's exactly how it worked. And he would do a lot of
seems to be evidence to tie him to his own murders more than almost anything else you've mentioned so far. He's informing as a federal informant on different murders. It's impossible for one person to be knowledgeable of different murders in different states unless they're involved.
That's right. And it was the letters that he sent to the police officers that are in the book also that really showed that he had a whole bunch of killings out there, because he would end many of them and say, if you don't want me, he'd be fishing for a department to come and talk to him. But if you don't want me, there's many other places that'll take me. This is all things he's writing in 2010, just before he's dying. He's telling the cops all over the country, there are other murders. Come and talk to me. Some did, some didn't. But nobody realized the magnitude of what this man had done.
So why do you think he didn't really admit to you and your partner, or how close did he get to admitting these things? And what do you think? One other question. In his piece that he wrote 5,500 in a repetitive fashion. I'm wondering if he tried to hit an even number, if he actually hit 500 and you've only found 100 of them so far. You think?
Yeah, the 5,500 is the 50 years of killing and 500 killings, and that would have been from 46 to 96. I found 121 murders so far, and
growing.
There's many more, because he was free to kill from 96 till 2009, so he was averaging 10 a year. There should be 630, but he always wanted to be the best killer ever, and it was always about the count with him. It was always about how many. And so when Timothy McVeigh blew up the federal building and killed 168 and got all that recognition, that really made Edwards mad, because Edwards had killed many, many more than Timothy McVeigh and was the most prolific killer. So he set out after Timothy McVeigh blew up the Murray building to kill even more. And he continued on for 16 years after the Murray building was blown up.
So he seemed like he changed his MO several times not to be caught. Like in 2001, I see that in September 18, New Jersey, he mailed anthrax letters to Congress and the press, killing 5 people.
Yeah, and if you really think about what happened there, that was 7 days after 9/11. And the 9/11 terrorists had just killed 3,000 people. Right. Timothy McVeigh was executed, actually, June of 2001, just before 9/11. And just before Timothy McVeigh was executed, Edwards kidnapped Chandra Levy. And Chandra Levy was throughout the press all through the summer of 2001 until the 9/11 attack happened. Once the 9/11 attack happened, Chandra Levy was off the front pages. 7 days later, Edwards anthraxes the media, Congress, the press, and takes all the recognition away again from the 9/11 terrorists, because now the anthrax is all over the United States, and who's doing it? And in those cases, 2 people went down for the anthrax attacks, not arrested, but one was accused and ended up getting $4 million plus from the FBI, and the other killed himself on July 27th, 2008 in a bathtub of overdose of Tylenol, supposedly. Mm-hmm. That whole 2000-2001 era after 9/11 was a very busy time for Mr. Edwards, and he came out with revenge after 2001. and killed every year up until his capture.
And what was Edwards actually raised?
He was raised in Cleveland, Ohio. And what's really amazing about that is in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1933 to 1938, that's the years that Edwards was born in 33, mother was shot in 38. Those 5 years, there was a serial killer called the Cleveland Torso Killer. And the Cleveland Torso Killer was cutting up men and women and laying them out in public. And this is where Edwards was raised, and this is the environment he was raised in. And
okay,
so
now I got to ask you a question. This has been burning since Monique brought up his mother being shot in the stomach. You say he's 5 years old, and he may have been responsible for this, but the thing that came to mind to me is that he's 5 years old. Someone shoots his mother in the abdomen. She lives for days. I guess she's in a coma, so she can't say anything about what happened.
6 days, yeah.
6 days. So then what just the intuition to me says that maybe this 5-year-old witnessed this. And maybe this 5-year-old had somebody there who ended up grooming him and manipulating, abusing him, and just trying to get him to tutor him to become another serial killer. What do you think about that possibility?
It's always crossed my mind that his father, who he never knew, could have been the Cleveland Torso Killer.
And could have also showed up and said, hey, you're my son, and this is what we do, and sort of just inculcated him into this.
When was his father? Was his father arrested first of all, or was he a serial killer? Was he a criminal?
We never knew who his father was. He never knew who his father was. He was born at the height of the Great Depression, and so that was a very shameful thing to be a female and pregnant. And so basically, he lived with an aunt and uncle the first 4 years. Mom went to prison for something, and when she came out in 1938. Within 8 months, she's dead, shot, and he's
John,
changed.
I have to say, I can't imagine a 5-year-old holding a rifle and shooting without, it has a big kickback. I mean, shooting a rifle, I mean, even for us, has a kick, let alone for a 5-year-old. If he did it.
To even know what he was doing to do it.
Or could that be an accidental?
That's the big question. If he did it, I can't even say he did it, but there's some very suspicious things that happened. For him to have his name changed after that killing and not to be attached to the original family and his mother, completely remove his identity basically at the age of 5. And that's why the Zodiac teased us with his identity this whole life. Because he had no idea who he was.
Right.
He didn't know if his name was Charles Meyer, is his name Edward Edwards, and that was clear throughout his psychological records that he was very conflicted with his upbringing and his 2 mothers, because after his first mother died, his second mother that adopted him died within a year of MS. And then he went to the orphanage, and then he was beat and raped and just came out a monster.
Right. You also kind of mentioned about Edwards possibly knowing Charles Manson. Was that possible?
Yeah, they were friends, actually. And there's a letter, if you go on my website to the date of July 9th, 1993 on my timeline, you can read the letter. But yeah, Charles Manson and Ed were in prison in Chillicothe, Ohio in 1952 to 54. They were released the same year. They were actually released on parole the same year that Manson was doing the Helter Skelter in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so Edwards knew Manson and did the Zodiac around the Bay Area also, because Manson was down there getting lots of recognition with what he was doing, and Edwards stole it away through the Zodiac. Have you ever tried
to talk to Manson?
No, it's funny, I sent him a letter just recently. I'd never even thought about it, but a friend of mine had mentioned, maybe you should just send him a letter. And so I did. So we'll see if I get a response.
What did you say in the letter? Did you mention Edwards?
Yeah, I did, and I sent him a book. So I hope it gets into the prison, and I did everything legally, so hopefully it will get in, and I want him to read it.
Well, I'm sure Manson is very much after recognition. So what about the letter? You were talking about the letter that Charles Manson, the fact that Charles Manson and Edwards knew each other, that's really not a coincidence. Tell me a little bit more about that, because that shocks me. Do you think that a lot of his ideas, because Charles Manson was in prison with no possibility of parole, could he have given a lot of his information to Edwards to implement once he gets out?
You know, I think those two conspired in ways that many people will never understand how these types of people communicate. They usually communicate, especially when one's in prison, through a third person, through letters, because everything's always being read in a prison, so you have to be cryptic, and that's kind of the way we dealt with him too. He could never confess in any of the letters he sent us to being a specific killer on a specific case, because if he did that,
it would be a confession.
They'd have the admission in the, and then he would have ruined his chances of being executed. That's what he always wanted. But Charles Manson and him go all the way back to 1952, and did not either stay in contact or run parallel, with what their goal in life was, and that is just to be evil killers. And Edwards was much more intelligent than Charles Manson, but had a very similar way about him that he could bring people in, and people loved him. People followed Ed Edwards, and if they didn't, he killed them.
Did he have any copycats?
Did Edwards have copycats?
Yeah.
Edwards would actually, when a serial killer would get caught, Edwards would go into the area where they were caught, such as the Son of Sam, and commit a crime like them, only not exactly like them. So it would leave police confused that, did we get the right guy, or is the guy still out there?
So he was the copycat of a lot of other serial killers.
He was the copycatter, because he was going to outdo every one of them. So whenever they were in the press with recognition, whenever their murders were in the press, he stole the press away with one of his murders. That's how he worked.
Mm-hmm. Now, people say that you lost all credibility when you said Edwards killed Jimmy Hoffa. Could you explain that?
Yeah, they did, and that happened early on too, because Edward actually writes 2 pages in his book about Jimmy Hoffa. He was good friends with Jimmy Hoffa. But this was in 1968, and this is 9 years before anybody ever knew who Jimmy Hoffa was. Jimmy Hoffa was killed in 1975. And he was lured to a restaurant, and the whole crime was made to go against the mob. And Edwards actually had befriended Jimmy Hoffa in prison, and Hoffa had promised Edwards a job in 1968 when he came out, and didn't come through. And in the book, you can read it on my website. Actually, there is a free download of Edwards' book on my website, coldcasecameron.com. But he mentions how he's going to take Jimmy out for dinner and slobber all over him, and that he was really worried that Jimmy would die. And this is 9 years before Jimmy Hoffa disappeared and did die. And in fact, Edwards had killed Hoffa in Michigan, because he had killed in Michigan over and over and over again since the 40s, 50s, 60s. And Hoffa lied to him in prison, and so he got even with him. And, you wonder, well, why does everybody know Jimmy Hoffa? Why do we care about Jimmy Hoffa? Well, it's because it was a crime of recognition, and it's been nothing but a big myth for 40 years as to where's Jimmy Hoffa. It becomes the butt of late-night jokes. But that's what he designed his murders to do. They would live in the press forever because they'd never find the body, and it would always leave them guessing.
Interesting. I do want to...
If I could just tell people on the Jimmy Hoffa thing, just go to on my website to the July 9th letter, 1993 on my website, and you can read what he talks about Marilyn or Manson and Jimmy Hoffa in that letter.
Okay, I just want to again announce that we are talking to John Cameron, the author of It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. Please, you can purchase his book at any bookstores, actually, and you can also go to his website, coldcasecameron.com. Can they buy your book from your website as well?
Yes, they can, and if they do, I'll sign it and send it to them right away. And I've got lots of books sitting in my living room I'd love to get rid of.
Well, your book is actually one of the largest I've read so far. It's more than, let's see, almost 400 pages. Yeah, it's actually 403.
Hey, if you write to the book of this show, let them know you heard it on Revolution Radio, on Monique's Matrix Revealed.
Private Eye Matrix Revealed. I wish I had your signature on mine, by the way.
Well, I'll send you another one.
I will give that one to Don at least.
I have to tell you guys one quick thing. When you were talking about the weather at the beginning of your show, it's a winter storm warning right now where I'm at.
Where are you?
Montana.
Oh, you are in Montana. What?
Yeah.
No way.
Yes. It's snowing right now, and we have a winter storm warning through the night and into tomorrow.
Oh, my God.
I think we can
how
hear the
could that
background
possibly
sound
be?
Sorry.
Go ahead. What did you say, Don?
I think we can hear I can hear some background sound. Maybe it's the wind in his windows or something.
I do hear that too. Maybe it's the snow or rain or stormy. That's really strange because it's 100 degrees here. What is it like over there right now? It's snowing and stormy?
36 degrees. It's snowing, and we're supposed to have about 6 inches of snow by morning.
Interesting.
And it's beautiful rain out.
What do you do right now since you're retired?
I play in a band. I'm a piano player and a singer, and I kind of run rental properties, and I investigate murders for people that contact me. That after releasing this book, I've had a lot of people contact me who wanted me to help them out on their loved ones missing, and if Edwards could have possibly done it. So that's really all I've been doing is that.
And do you have the second book coming out after this one? Since there's more murders that keeps coming up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to have to, because it really, we had to end writing the book a year ago, and since then it's just been so many more things that this man had done and so much more proof of what he had done, that what I think I'm going to do is just put a book out that's in his own words of what he did, because he put it all out there on the internet. So I'm just going to put it all together in an outline form, and
I guess it's hard to show. It must be hard to show all the links, all the overlaps, or the interlacing of what he's done here. But I'm looking at the man, and the old man seems weak. He doesn't seem. You hear him talk. He doesn't sound that intelligent, and yet he overpowered not just children but adults and men. And I'm wondering how he was able to manipulate and overpower each of these people when it came to the point of threat.
Well, that's what was so smart about him. He never really had to do that, because all of his victims came to him and had no idea what was about to happen. And so how he would kill them a lot of times is with what he called the rabbit punch. And if you go on my website, you can watch a video where he describes this June of 2010. And that is that he got so close to every one of his victims that he was able to take them out with a quick punch to the throat. And then, at that point, they're unable to scream, they're unable to move, they're unable to breathe, but they're going to live through what he's about to do to them. Then he would like to drown them in bathtubs or strangle them. And then he would stab the bodies, post-mortem a lot of times, and leave funny patterns at the scenes, and leave items clutched in their hands, and just leave things very strange so that it would confuse police.
So he never really had a specific signature, because then that he would be recognized for that particular signature. And would he ever take some kind of a trophy back with him?
When he was finally caught in 2009, and they searched his house, but they didn't really know who he was. They only took items that would tie to a murder that they caught him on in Wisconsin. And after that, his kids threw away an entire room full of stuff that was their father's, and it's gone. But there was a one file that they saved, and it was his personal papers that he had kept in this little chest. And in those papers was all of his connections to the Zodiac case. Oh. And I got access to those, and that's really what started opening it up. I knew he was the Zodiac in 2010. Well, if he's the Zodiac, then he's killing slaves in his afterlife, which is satanic. And he likes killing people because that's what the Zodiac said. So this wasn't your normal killer. This was a guy who spent every waking moment of his life killing. And if he could walk into a library on a college campus on a Saturday afternoon and kill a woman in the back and walk out, he would. And he did that exact thing. And on the way out, he said, I think there's a woman in the back that needs to be checked. Oh. Everybody would see him. Everybody would be able to put a description out on him. But he was always slightly disguised. And that's what he would get off on, the fact that he could walk in just like that in broad daylight and kill somebody and walk out. Everybody see him and nobody catch him.
Okay, 2 questions. First of all, how was he disguised? And why would he actually, so basically, he would disguise himself with the intent of killing someone, which obviously he had to have the intent first, going into a library, killing someone, coming out knowing that he's not going to be recognized, right? And then he has the audacity to actually tell people, go check it out. Somebody needs help over there. Wouldn't people put 2 and 2 together at some point? The voice, the DNA, something left behind?
Yeah, they would always put it together that it might have been the guy, but they'd never identify the guy because the disguises were always simple. It was always a pair of glasses, a hat, a false mustache, maybe a false beard, a pair of shoe lifts, a cane, just something that would stand out and people would concentrate on that instead of the man himself.
Right.
If you want to see the best disguise as to how it worked, just go on my website on the homepage, and there's a YouTube video where he conned his way into the West Memphis 3 HBO Paradise Lost documentary, and he is under disguise there wearing a hat, a false beard, and glasses, and it's very simple disguise, and nobody would have ever identified him as Edward Edwards, but now that we know it's Edward Edwards, it's clearly that it was Edward Edwards under that disguise, and he's wearing a false beard and a hat and glasses and a cane.
Mm-hmm. And what about his own family? I mean, if it's someone like him who can just walk into a library without any motive, basically no motive except killing a human being who's innocent, and walk out, how come he never killed his own family? Did he ever abuse them? Did he ever beat them up? Were they ever scared of him? I mean, you interviewed the wives, the children.
Yeah,
did they know about it?
He had 5 children with his current wife, Kay, and they were married for 43 years.
Did she have any idea?
He stabbed Kay once and wouldn't let her go to the hospital, and he treated her because he was that good. He was good. He beat his kids. He was abusive. He forced them to leave and live in campgrounds throughout the 80s because he would put them up in campgrounds while he would kill in nearby states. He had a killer dog later on in the 90s that would watch the kids, and if they moved, the dog would take them down. And so the kids never went against their father. The kids and the wife, they're all kind of like the Stockholm Syndrome. It was just like they were going along with the program because Dad was the boss and you didn't cross him. But
were they scared of him?
Yeah, but he had the good side. They were always the family. He portrayed the family man everywhere. He went to soccer games, churches. He took his kids to wrestling. He did all of that stuff. But then he had this horrible evil side. And it was about, 40% of his time he wasn't home. He was out killing.
Interesting. Okay, I have 2 questions, actually. I think that you mentioned that Edward always wanted to be executed. Is that something that he actually wanted? Or did I misunderstand you? Yeah.
No, that's what he wanted. Once he was caught, he demanded to be executed. And in 2010, when he finally got caught and he confessed to a double murder, he thought he was going to be executed in Wisconsin. Then he found out that Wisconsin didn't have the death penalty. So he immediately contacted the press in June of 2010. And the press came into the prison, and he started confessing to 3 other murders, trying to get his death penalty. And he flat says that on the YouTube interview, that it was all to get his death penalty.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Okay. Are you snowed in now? You okay?
Can you hear me now?
We kind of lost you there a little bit. Yeah, I heard you. Yeah. So he always wanted to be executed. That's very strange. How did he want to be executed? By what? What type of execution? Lethal.
Yeah, okay. He says that in one of my letters. It was needle. He did not want to be electrocuted, and he was scheduled to be to get the needle August 31st, 2011.
Okay, I'm having a little bit of hard time. There we are.
Hey, Monique, I got a couple more questions.
Absolutely.
A real good one now, but it's too long. What organizations, what legal bodies have responded to your information so far? Have you got any cooperation from other detectives or law enforcement that are turning the corner? And has anything been done to bring further light to what you've exposed here?
I spent a lot of time in 2010 and 11 contacting police and FBI, and I had the U.S. prosecutor in Washington, D.C. that is on the Changalivi case. I supplied them a lot of information. Also, some FBI agents down in Florida and a police officer out in California, but I don't check back with them. I don't want to be the pain in the neck. I'm done with what I've done, and I put it out there, and then they can go with it if they want to go with it. I just had to stop because it was very frustrating, actually, trying to get anybody in law enforcement to work on this guy.
Well, the media also takes a sort of a bent towards famous cases, and so something new like this, it seems that they get their story and they don't necessarily want to go back and rewrite a history. I'm looking here at the modern day murders by number of victims, the 10 most prolific killers in the past 50 years, and it's listing them worldwide. But there's 67 and 58. The highest numbers are 218, 300 plus, and 138 plus. And it sounds like Edwards was at 500, trying to top everybody here.
That's exactly what he was doing. And in many of these cases that people were arrested on, the media reported on it. And then the reporters went on to write books and become pretty famous on a lot of these cases. So the media has already put out a lot of, I guess it would be false stories on the true killer. And so a lot like the police, they don't want to open it back up. It's a bucket of worms.
Oh, that was the question I had. His rabbit punch. Were you able to go back and look at the forensics on these different murder victims and see if there was damage to the throat on all of his cases?
Yeah, that's actually what tied them together. The broken hyoid bone. That's the
broken what?
A hyoid bone. It's the hyoid.
Yeah.
It's
hyoid.
The bone in the neck.
Your voice is coming in and out, John.
It must be the weather here.
It might be. You know, John, one question that I had actually was, the daughter finally, did she call you? One of the children actually admitted that, I think maybe you were talking about my father, right?
Yeah.
Did she call?
What happened was...
okay, I totally can't hear you.
I can hear him, Monique. He's coming through. It's just not really loud. Go ahead. See if we can get you.
Well, fill you in as to what happened there. In 2009, Edwards' daughter was watching a cold case special of a double Lover's Lane murder in Wisconsin. And she recalled her father taking her to a scene like that. And they lived there at the time. And so that began the unraveling of who he was. They got his DNA and it matched. And that was the first murder he got caught on, was a Lover's Lane murder in Wisconsin in 1980.
Okay. Okay, 1 second. I think that we're going to drop you
a little bit here.
Yeah. Let's
John,
reconnect with him.
If you could hear me, John, I'm gonna disconnect with you and try to give you a call right back. Maybe it'll clear it up.
Well, I can hear you guys perfect. So
your voice is coming in and out. There we go.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to
try
call
again here. He was doing really good. We had a great connection with him for 90% of the show there.
But who would know that we have snow in Montana at this time? It was so hot
John,
here.
do we have you back, sir?
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Oh, much better. Much better. Okay, so you were talking about his daughter who called you?
And the evidence...
Well, what happened after Edwards was caught and after his daughter turned him in, I contacted his daughter.
Oh, I see.
And drove out to Ohio and met with her and her family and the mother. And that's when I recovered the documents that led me to the Zodiac. And that's when I realized that how horrible he was. And I just knew that I wasn't going to let it go.
Right, right. In fact, the back of your book there is a short letter, I guess it's from Ed Edwards, that says, "Dear John and Neil, it's me. You say you won the Zodiac game. I remember a guy in Deer Lodge back in 1956 they called the Zodiac. He killed a guy in Great Falls. I may be 77, but I don't forget things. Good luck with your Zodiac game. If you write about me, make sure you say nice things. Your friend, Ed Edwards. P.S. I love you too." Did you tell him you loved him?
we actually did. Once we realized how horrible he was, that the only way to get to this guy's mind was going to be to challenge him. And once my friend cracked his code, we realized that, Neil, this man is satanic. That Edwards is satanic and had never had any love in his life. Mm-hmm. And so we actually forgave him in the first couple letters we sent him for everything he had done, and just tried to win him over. And
okay, so you were trying to get information by doing that, right?
Yeah, okay. I guess I was messing with him. I really did forgive him. I guess in the end, it's horrible the way that the way he was brought up, and he never had any chance from the very beginning. And it's a shame that he wasn't caught earlier.
Interesting. Do you think that, just a personal question, I guess, do you believe in punishment versus rehabilitation?
Well, I worked for the parole board, and so Montana was pretty big on rehabilitation. And I believe in rehabilitation, but there is no rehabilitation for a guy like Ed Edwards.
Okay.
So do you think that that could be done again today? Or do you think that the forensic and the DNA kind of evidence makes this much harder to pull off in today's scenario? Or maybe easier?
The DNA evidence actually made it easier because he planted DNA.
You mean to tie him together? I'm talking about you're saying easier to tie him to the more modern cases. But I'm saying for somebody to pull off what Wayne Edwards, what he's doing, there could be parallels. People who don't know about him doing the same thing as him today or over these years. Do you think we're going to get more of these serial killers? Is it going to be harder to hide all this evidence as Wayne did?
Well, he makes it pretty clear that there's at least 5 others, and that if we don't expose what he really was, that is the Zodiac Killer, that this will just continue on and on and on. That's how he puts it.
Telling you there's other people out there doing what I'm doing, and I know about them. In other words, either he figured it out because he's not doing them, or he talked to him in prison. Do you think?
Yeah, it was a secret society. He had a secret society of Satanists, killers. I actually met one of them here in Montana who got to partake in putting him back in prison, and his name was Frank Dryman, and he was from Vallejo, California, and he was a Satanist that Edwards knew from Vallejo in 1968, and that's why Edwards went down to Vallejo in 68 and did the Zodiac killings, was because this man was also down there. He actually tried to set this man up as the Zodiac Killer, and this man's now 82 years old. He's sitting in Deer Lodge Prison here in Montana, but he actually absconded parole for 40 years, 1970 until 2010. After Edwards tried to set him up. So I got to interview him in prison, and he really gave me an insight as to what Edwards' thought process was, and that is that he ran around the country portraying himself as Satan. And what that meant is he was a preacher, he was a cop, and he was a doctor of psychiatry. He was your best friend. He'd groom his way into your life, and then he'd take your child.
Or take someone that you love.
So this goes into what Monique does, where she's investigating lost and stolen children worldwide, and Monique wants to do a documentary looking into kids that have disappeared in the national parks, as well as just as a starting point. But there's a lot of people that go missing, a lot more than Edwards could have ever killed, that have no answers and no bodies. So and one of the theories is Satanists for ritualistic killings or pleasure killings.
Yeah, but those bodies do get found, right? All those children that he killed, or those people, bodies were accounted for, weren't they?
For the most part, there's still quite a few out of the 121 that I found. I think there was probably about 10 that were never found.
Uh-huh.
But Edwards himself writes about a killer who could kill without the need, and Edwards clearly had the need for recognition, but he writes about a silent, what's it called, the hidden serial killer, that
the undetectable serial killer,
undetectable, that doesn't kill for recognition and is efficient at disposing of the bodies. Maybe he knew of some of these killers, and they just kill, put away the body, go on to the next. There is no evidence because there's no body found. There's just a missing person. So with the DOJ statistics are 800,000 children a year in the United States. What is it, Monique? I always want to make sure I got that right.
Oh, no, those are people. 180,000 children go missing from they go missing from United States, period, not just national parks.
And only like 20% are found, right?
Right, 25 to 30%. Are the ones that are either runaways or victims of sex trafficking or human trafficking or killed by a predator or pedophile, and they're little children. And the rest of them, really, they have no accountability for. So that's what I wanted to do, is find out where are the rest of the children. But if people like him, who are satanic, part of a satanic cult, was he actually the head of a satanic cult and he had followers that he started?
He would have been the top dog in the whole thing. Yeah, he was number one. There was nobody underneath him. There was never going to be anyone above him. I mean, everybody was underneath him. There was never going to be anyone above him. And that was in anything in his life, not just the secret society.
Right.
And
could it be possible that some of those children were sacrificial for his satanic cult?
Well, I know for sure in the Atlanta child killings that two of them were. Two of them were fed to predators, basically, and then he killed the predators. So
what do you mean predators?
His friends, his child molester friends, that he would, have hold the kid for a few days and then kill the kid and then kill the predators.
Oh, it just gives me chills when you say stuff like that. I wanted to ask you, the series that you did on True TV, which is called Most Evil, was that about Ed Edwards?
No, that was, I got asked to do that because of a serial killer named Nathan Barjona, who came here to Great Falls in 1996 and kidnapped a little boy and cannibalized him. And we ended up catching him dressed as a police officer 2 years later at a school trying to do the same thing. And it was a pretty horrendous case. He was from Massachusetts and he liked to kidnap little boys, and his fantasy was to eat them. And he kidnapped one here and did that.
Wow. Was a movie Cannibal based on this?
No, I don't think so. That came out probably before he came around. But he was a horrible man from Massachusetts who had a serious problem with kidnapping little boys when he was young. Spent 20 years in prison. They released him to Montana, and he came here and immediately kidnapped and killed a little boy.
Something that concerns me is we have a fantasy that police catch these people, that they catch most of them, that there's a few that kind of get away. But I'm wondering how many undetected there are. If this guy was doing this, just the guy that you caught, he could have done many more that they don't admit to. And I'm wondering if at some point somebody may send you some letters or something who might have been a protege of Edwards or some other, read your book and say, hey, here I am, it's me, look at me. But how many of these, do you have any sense that there's a heck of a lot more people out there that could be getting away with this stuff than we're even aware of?
Well, I think there's a lot of sick, evil killers in the world, but as for the type like Edward Edwards, I think they're few and far between. But he makes it pretty clear that there are others, and that the only way they'll be exposed is if he's exposed. And so as long as we keep him under wraps, they will continue.
Mm-hmm. What is your guess as to how many serial killers actually do get arrested or found? Because obviously they live among us for many, many years, just like he did. I mean, for how many years? 55 years he lived and killed and was married and had children. So, I mean, your next door neighbor can be a serial killer. You wouldn't even know it.
Yeah, that's the way he was. Everybody that knew him liked him. He was a likable guy. So how many more are there like him? I don't know. I really don't believe that there's that many like him. I just think he was an anomaly. He was one of the best, and that was his goal. And he set out to be that way since he was so young.
Sure.
And throughout our whole lives, when you think about this, goes all the way back to the 30s that this man lived and did all this. And so he's kind of lived through the entire media exposure of all this, and he manipulated it.
Well, he kind of reminds me of John Gacy, who used to look like a clown. And do you know about the case of John Gacy?
Yeah, he killed the little boys and buried them in his basement.
Oh, many of them. And he used to tie them up. And actually, he attracted a lot of children because of acting like a clown. Yeah.
Edwards was able to attract children through his own children. And so that was even a better ruse. And if you go to my website, you'll see a timeline of his daughters that's on the homepage, and she describes friends of hers disappearing, dad telling her that they must have been hit in the head with a bat, things like that. I mean, it was just their whole childhood was like that they would have friends disappear.
Was she able to identify any of the kids as kids that she met, some of these kids that died?
No, because they moved around to so many places and so many states and so many schools and had to change their names that she can hardly even tell exactly what state she was in what year. So she gave me a timeline as best as she could remember, and it's in my book and on my website. And it's very interesting to read because they were everywhere.
Right. I went to the Zodiac.com site, and it says a list of suspected killers. And if you have a suspect, have you contacted them? Did they contact you back? Because Wayne Edward, he's not on there.
Yeah, he's not. No, there's a feud going on, I guess you could say, between ZodiacKiller.com and this. Tom Voigt is the owner of ZodiacKiller.com, and that's the website that Edwards taunted his whole life.
Right. Well, we're coming to the end of the show. I do want to remind everyone to go to coldcasecameron.com and first of all, check it out. Check out all the information that John Cameron put out there. He's the author of It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. And my name is Monique Lesson. I am the private investigator, and my show is Private Eye Matrix Revealed. I want to thank you, John, first of all, and most of all. That was a great interview. Thank you, John. Thank you, Joe, for putting it all together. And until next time.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
We're an anarcho-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week. Yes. But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Yes, I see. By a civil majority in the case of purely internal affairs. Be quiet. But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more... Be quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! It's just a flesh wound.
I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, and stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible.
You're a loony.
The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Hi everybody, it's me, The Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside